Nathaniel saved her from a cruel fate, until his new employee changed him first.
They say power is the greatest addiction in the world. But what happens when one person walks into your life and makes you realize that everything you've built means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with? This is the story of a man who had everything except the one thing that actually mattered. Meet Alistair Veyne, a man who turned a small investment firm into a billion-dollar empire through ruthlessness and control. At 35, he answers to no one and forgives nothing. Then Emily Carter arrives, a 27-year-old woman who refuses to be intimidated by his power. In a world of weakness, she becomes his greatest strength. This is their story. New York City has a way of making people harder. The taller the buildings, the colder the hearts. And in the financial district, where glass towers touch the clouds and ambition burns hotter than the sun, there lived a man who had mastered the art of being untouchable. Alistair Veyne stood on the 42nd floor of his office building, looking down at the city sprawled beneath him like a chessboard. Every piece was where it belonged. Every move had been calculated. Every success had come at the price of something else, trust, maybe. Kindness, certainly. But Alistair had long ago decided those were luxuries he couldn't afford. The thing about building an empire is that you learn something essential: people will hurt you if you let them. They'll smile while they betray you. They'll use your vulnerabilities against you. So Alistair had built walls so high that not even he could remember what it felt like to be inside them without armor. His employees respected him. The board members feared him. The media called him a genius. And yet, in the silence of his penthouse apartment at night, Alistair Veyne was utterly, completely alone. He had learned this lesson at 16, when his father's business partner stole everything and left his family in ruins. He had learned it again at 22, when someone he thought was his closest friend took credit for his work. And he had reinforced it 1,000 times over in the years since then. Never trust. Never show weakness. Never let anyone close enough to destroy you. It was a formula that had worked perfectly. At 35, Alistair had built Veyne Holdings from virtually nothing into one of the most powerful investment firms on the East Coast. He employed 300 people. He controlled billions in assets. He had everything that money could buy and power could command. Politicians returned his calls. Celebrities wanted to be seen with him. The wealthiest families in the country sought his advice. And every single day, he was absolutely miserable. Though he would never admit it to anyone. Especially not to himself. His office was a reflection of his mind, cold, organized, ruthlessly efficient. Glass and steel. Minimalist. Nothing personal. The only decoration was a photograph of New York's skyline at night, taken from his building. It was beautiful in the way that Alistair understood beauty, distant, untouchable, perfect precisely because it kept the world at arm's length. His assistant, Margaret, had worked for him for 7 years. She was competent and invisible, which was exactly how he liked it. She came, she did her job, she left. She never asked personal questions. She never tried to be his friend. She understood the transaction they were in, work for pay, and nothing more. Alistair appreciated that about her. There was no wasted emotion. No messy complications. But last Tuesday, Margaret had given notice. She was moving to Boston, she said. To be closer to her grandchildren. Alistair had accepted her resignation in the same way he accepted board reports, with a nod and a note that he would begin interviews for her replacement on Monday. He didn't even realize she had left until he arrived at work and found her desk empty. So it was that on a Monday morning in early September, when the leaves were just starting to think about changing colors and the air still held the warmth of late summer, Alistair sat at his desk and prepared to meet the candidates for the position of executive assistant. He had a list of 40 names. Each one had been vetted by HR, each one had been screened for competence, and each one would likely be instantly forgettable. He started at 8 o'clock. The first candidate was a woman in her 40s who was overqualified and desperate, which was a dangerous combination. She tried too hard to impress him, laughing at things he didn't mean to be funny, and by the end of the interview, Alistair had already decided he would never hire her. Desperation had a smell, and he couldn't stand it. The second candidate was a man who had held the same position at 3 different companies in 5 years. Alistair asked why he had left each one. The man's answers were all variations on the same theme: the bosses were impossible to please, the workload was unreasonable, the culture was toxic. Alistair translated this to mean, "I quit when things got difficult." He showed the man out. By the time 9 o'clock rolled around, Alistair's patience was already wearing thin. He had 3 more candidates to interview before lunch, and none of them had impressed him so far. He almost didn't look up when his assistant buzzed through to say the next candidate was waiting. "Send her in," he said, already turning his attention back to his laptop. The door opened quietly. Alistair heard the soft sound of someone entering his office, the careful way they walked across his expensive flooring, but he didn't look up. He was making a point, a small one, perhaps, but a point nonetheless. The interview was already a hierarchy, and he was at the top of it. "You're late," he said without glancing away from his screen. There was a pause. Not the kind of pause that came from someone who was scrambling to apologize, but the kind that suggested the person was taking a moment to assess the situation. "It's 8:58, a woman's voice said. The interview was scheduled for 9. Alistair looked up. The first thing he noticed was that she hadn't apologized. The second thing he noticed was her eyes. They were gray-green, like the ocean before a storm, and they were looking at him with something that might have been amusement. The third thing he noticed was that she was completely unimpressed by him. Emily Carter, this was her name according to the file on his desk, was 27 years old, 5'7", with dark hair pulled back into a neat braid. She wore a simple navy blue dress that was neither fashionable nor unfashionable, just practical. She carried a folder, which she held at her side like a soldier carrying a rifle. Every detail about her was controlled, organized, and intentional. Even the way she stood suggested someone who had thought about how to occupy space in the world and had decided on precision. "Then I suppose I'm early," she said, and she smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it transformed her entire face. And in that moment, Alistair experienced something he hadn't felt in a very long time: surprise. For the first time that morning, he had nothing to say. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." Emily sat. She didn't arrange herself for comfort. She sat the way someone sits who has prepared for an interview, back straight, hands folded, ready. She opened her folder and withdrew a single piece of paper, which she placed on her lap. "I've prepared notes," she said. "About the position. About your company. And about what I believe I could contribute. I understand you value efficiency and precision. I do too. I also understand that you're interviewing 40 candidates. It's probably more efficient if I tell you upfront what you need to know rather than letting you ask me questions to which you could find the answers in my resume." Alistair leaned back in his chair. He should have been annoyed. Nobody walked into his office and took control of the interview. Nobody reduced the dynamic of power so quickly and so smoothly. And yet, he found himself curious. "Go ahead." She did. For the next 20 minutes, Emily laid out her qualifications without flourish or false modesty. She had worked as an executive assistant for 3 executives, each one in a different industry. Each position had lasted at least 3 years, a fact that immediately set her apart from other candidates, who seemed to job hop every 18 months. She had managed budgets, coordinated international meetings, handled crisis communications, and yes, she could organize a calendar. But more than that, she had what she called anticipatory competence, the ability to figure out what her boss would need before they knew they needed it. "I understand," she said, "that executive assistants are often invisible. Most executives see their assistants as administrative support, which is technically correct. But I've found that the best assistants are strategic. We understand not just what needs to happen, but how to make it happen in a way that furthers the broader goals of the company. I'm not interested in just scheduling meetings. I'm interested in contributing to the success of the organization. Alistair found that he was listening to her in a way he hadn't listened to anyone in years. Not just hearing the words, but actually considering them. "Why did you leave your last position?" he asked. Emily closed her folder. "The company was acquired. My executive was offered an executive position with the acquiring company, but I chose to move on. I felt I had accomplished what I wanted to accomplish there. Which was to prove that I could help build something successful. I did. So I moved on to the next challenge." There was no bitterness in her voice. No sense of loss. Just a straightforward explanation of a decision made and executed. Alistair realized that this woman didn't view her career as a series of accommodations to other people's ambitions. She viewed it as a progression toward her own. The interview ended at 9:35. Alistair had planned for each interview to last 15 minutes. He had kept Emily in his office for 35, and he could have talked to her for another hour. After she left, he told HR to stop scheduling interviews. "Hire her," he said, and then he hung up before anyone could ask questions. Emily Carter started on the following Monday. On her first day, she arrived at 7:30 in the morning, which was 45 minutes before the office officially opened. She moved through his organizational system like she was learning a language she had already studied, quickly and with an ease that suggested she didn't need to ask permission. She found the files that were out of order. She noticed that his calendar had 12 conflicting entries for the same time slot 3 months from now. She identified 5 meetings that should have been emails and 2 emails that required immediate attention. By the time Alistair arrived at 9 o'clock, Emily had already prevented 3 crises and created a priority list for the day that was so perfectly calibrated to his actual needs that it made him wonder if she was a magician. "Good morning," she said, sliding a coffee across his desk. "I noticed you drink your coffee black, no sugar, around 8:30. You prefer the Colombian blend from the cafe on the corner. I ordered some yesterday for mornings when the cafe is too crowded. I've also noticed that you have a 15-minute window between your 8:30 personal time and your 9 o'clock meeting, which is when I'll do my daily briefing unless something is urgent. This morning, there are 3 urgent items." Alistair stared at her. "You've been here for how long?" "Since 7:30. You have a meeting with the Singapore office that someone moved to 3 o'clock your time without checking with you. That's 11 o'clock tonight there. I've sent them a note asking if we can move it to 9 tomorrow morning instead, which is 5 o'clock their evening. I've also flagged the Patterson account. I noticed the quarterly review is overdue, and given the size of that account, that's an oversight. And finally, your mother called. She said it wasn't urgent, but she wanted to know if you'd have time to call her back sometime this week." Alistair felt something twist in his chest. His mother. He hadn't spoken to her in 3 weeks. He couldn't quite remember why he hadn't called her back the last time she had reached out. Work had been busy. There was a deal closing. There was always a deal closing. "I'll call her at lunch," he said. Emily nodded and placed the briefing sheet on his desk. Then she turned to leave. "How did you notice the Colombian blend?" he asked. She paused in the doorway. "You have 3 empty bags from that cafe in your trash. All from the Colombian blend." It seemed like a preference worth accommodating. She closed the door quietly behind her. Within a month, Emily had reorganized his entire world. But the real change came in the way she approached her job. She didn't just manage his schedule, she managed his life with a thoughtfulness that was staggering in its attention to detail. She noticed when he skipped meals and started leaving salads on his desk around lunchtime. She observed that he hated 3 of his monthly board meetings and began scheduling them early enough that he could cancel if needed without disrupting other appointments. She realized he always worked until 8 o'clock at night, so she started leaving detailed updates on his desk so he could make decisions without calling her back. It was Emily who noticed that his CFO was making errors in the quarterly reports. It was Emily who realized that a meeting with a potential client was going to be contentious and suggested they move it to neutral territory rather than his office. It was Emily who gently corrected him when he was about to walk into a $400 dinner meeting without the file he would need. Alistair found himself looking forward to her updates. He found himself thinking about what she had said to him at the end of the day. He found himself wondering what she would suggest for a problem he was facing, and then he would realize, to his slight embarrassment, that he should probably try thinking about it himself first. A month became 2 months. 2 months became 3. By December, Emily was indispensable, and Alistair knew it. That was when everything changed. The winter of that year came early to New York. By mid-November, the trees had already shed their leaves, and the city took on that gray, metallic quality it got when the cold settled in. Alistair Veyne's office, high above the streets below, felt even colder than usual. Not because of the temperature, but because something had broken, and he couldn't quite figure out what it was. It started with a phone call from the board chairman on a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of phone call that makes your stomach drop before the person on the other end even speaks. Alistair was in a meeting with his senior executives when Margaret buzzed through. Not Emily. Margaret had long since moved to Boston, and said it was urgent. He took the call in his private office. "We have a problem," the chairman said without preamble. His name was Richard Caldwell, and he had been on the board of Veyne Holdings since the beginning. He was not a man who used the word problem lightly. "What kind of problem?" Alistair asked. "The confidential kind. Someone inside your company has been leaking information about our deals to outside parties. We've had 3 major investments compromised in the last 6 weeks. 3. Do you understand what that means?" Alistair understood immediately. Each deal that had been compromised represented millions of dollars. More importantly, it represented trust. Clients didn't work with Veyne Holdings because they thought the firm was competent. They could find competent anywhere. They worked with Veyne Holdings because they believed their information was secure. That their secrets would remain secrets. "Who?" Alistair asked. "That's what I need you to find out." "And Alistair? You need to find out fast. If this gets out, if our clients find out that we've been leaking information, it will destroy us." The call ended. Alistair sat in the silence of his office, and for a moment, he felt something he had thought he had eliminated from his life years ago: fear. Not the physical kind, but the deeper kind. The kind that came from realizing that everything you had built was fragile. That power was an illusion. That you were always one mistake away from losing it all. He called an emergency meeting of the senior staff. There were 8 of them, the people who had access to the most sensitive information, the people who knew the details of deals before they became public. 8 people who could have betrayed him. "Someone in this room," Alistair said, "has been leaking confidential information to outside parties. I'm going to give you one opportunity to tell me who you are. You do that, and we handle this internally. You don't, and I call the federal authorities." The room was silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Alistair watched their faces, trying to read guilt in the twitch of a jaw or the widening of eyes, but they were all good at their jobs, which meant they were all good at hiding things. "Security will be conducting interviews with each of you over the next 2 days, Alistair continued. "We will find out who did this. And when we do, that person will face not just termination, but legal consequences." The meeting ended. The executives filed out, and Alistair was left alone with his thoughts, which were not good company. Emily appeared in his doorway a few minutes later. She did that sometimes, sensed when something was wrong without anyone telling her. Alistair had stopped questioning how she did it. He had simply accepted that she had a quality that most people lacked, which was the ability to pay attention to the world around her. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked. Alistair looked at her. She was standing in the doorway in her usual composed way, and for a moment, he felt a wave of something he couldn't quite name. It was almost like relief. Like no matter what was happening, as long as Emily was there, it would be manageable. "We have a leak," he said. "Someone's selling our information." Emily's expression shifted. "How bad?" "Bad enough. 3 deals compromised. Millions of dollars." She closed the door and sat down across from him. "What can I do?" "Nothing. This is a problem I have to solve." "You don't have to solve everything alone." Alistair looked at her sharply. That was the thing about Emily, she had a way of saying things that cut straight to the heart of who he was. And what she was really saying was, "You don't have to be alone. Just do your job," he said, and he meant it kindly. "That's enough." Over the next 72 hours, Alistair descended into a world he had hoped never to visit. Security interviews. Document reviews. Forensic analysis of email and file access logs. The company brought in an outside firm that specialized in corporate espionage, and together they began tracing the flow of information. It was meticulous work, and it was heartbreaking work, because with each piece of evidence they uncovered, it became clearer that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't someone who had made a mistake. This was deliberate. Calculated. Malicious. Alistair barely slept. He existed on coffee and the kind of adrenaline that comes from fighting for survival. Emily remained at the office most nights, making sure he ate, making sure he had what he needed. She didn't ask questions about the investigation. She simply understood that he was carrying something heavy, and she did what she could to lighten the load. It was Emily who brought him dinner on a Friday night while he was reviewing financial records with the security team. It was Emily who ordered new coffee when the old coffee got cold. It was Emily who, at 2 o'clock in the morning, gently suggested that he go home and sleep, because running himself into the ground wouldn't help anyone. He didn't go home. He stayed in the office. And that was when everything fell apart. The security team found the documents on Saturday morning. Confidential files. Strategic plans. Deal details. All of them printed out and found in a desk drawer in one of the back offices. The drawer belonged to Emily Carter. Alistair felt the world tilt. The security director brought him the news in person because protocol demanded that sensitive information about a potential suspect be delivered face-to-face. The director was a man named Marcus Webb, and he had the expression of someone who had done this before and didn't enjoy it any more now than he had the first time. "The documents were found in her desk at approximately 6:15 this morning," Marcus said. "We have photographs. We have chain of custody. And we have her access logs, which show that she accessed these files on 3 separate occasions in the past 2 weeks." Alistair stared at the photographs on the screen. Emily's desk. The drawer that he had never opened, never looked in. The files that should never have been there. "There's more," Marcus continued, and Alistair realized that he was experiencing something he had read about but never felt before, the sensation of his heart breaking. Not metaphorically. Actually breaking. Like something inside his chest was shattering into pieces. "We found communications," Marcus said. "Encrypted messages to an outside account. Someone is paying her. A lot of money. $50,000 has been transferred to an account in her name over the past 6 weeks." Alistair felt as if he were drowning. The office was spinning around him. Emily. His Emily. The person who had brought coffee to his desk. The person who had organized his entire world. The person who had made him believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth feeling in this life besides ambition and fear. "Bring her in," he heard himself say. "I want to talk to her." Emily arrived at the office at her usual time on Monday morning. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Alistair knew this because he could see it in the way she walked into the conference room where he was waiting. She was carrying her usual folder. She was dressed in her usual precise way. She had no idea that her world was about to end. "Sit down," Alistair said. She sat. And then she looked at him, and he saw the moment that she realized something was wrong. "What's happened?" Alistair had practiced what he was going to say. He had stood in his office for hours, rehearsing the words, trying to figure out how to say them in a way that wouldn't destroy him. But when he looked at her, all of his preparation crumbled. "Why did you do it?" he asked. Emily's face went pale. "What?" "The files. The confidential documents. We found them, Emily. We have your access logs. We have the money trail. $50,000. Someone is paying you to steal from me." He watched her face as he spoke, waiting for the moment when she would break, when she would admit to it, when she would finally reveal herself as the person he had been terrified she was all along. He was waiting for confirmation that his instinct was right, that you could never trust anyone, that everyone had a price, that Emily had been a con from the beginning. But that moment never came. Instead, Emily's eyes filled with tears. Real tears. The kind that came from a place so deep that you couldn't fake them even if you wanted to. Her hands started to shake. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not, Alistair, I didn't do that. The evidence is clear. Then someone planted it." Alistair wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe her. But belief was a luxury, and he had learned a long time ago that he couldn't afford it. Who would do that? "I don't know," Emily said, and she was crying now, really crying, tears streaming down her face. "But I swear to you, I didn't leak that information. I wouldn't. I would never." Her voice broke. "How could you think I would do that?" "Because the evidence says you did." Emily stood up so quickly that her chair fell backward. "Did you ever think that maybe someone wanted you to think that? Did you ever consider that whoever did this might have wanted to frame me? Why would they do that?" "Because I'm close to you," Emily said, and there was anger in her voice now, cutting through the tears. "Because they know that if you think I'm guilty, you'll destroy me. You'll make an example of me. She stopped. She looked at him, and in that look was every dream she had harbored, every moment they had shared, and the devastating realization that it had all been destroyed in a single conversation. "I think I should go," she said quietly. "Yes. I think you should." She walked toward the door, and then she stopped. "For what it's worth," she said, without turning around, "I believed in you. I believed in this company. I believed in..." She couldn't finish. She just left. Alistair sat in the silence of the conference room, and he realized that he had done exactly what he had taught himself to do years ago. He had pushed away the one person who had gotten close to him. He had used the evidence, which was his excuse, his justification, his armor. But underneath all of that was the truth that he had been terrified all along. Terrified that if he let Emily matter too much, if he allowed himself to actually feel something for her, that the universe would take her away from him in the cruelest way possible. And now, he had done it himself. The weekend was the longest of his life. Alistair conducted the investigation with mechanical precision, working with Marcus Webb and the security team to trace exactly how the documents had ended up in Emily's desk. He barely slept. He barely ate. He existed in a state of numb efficiency, which was the closest thing to feeling that he could manage. It was Monday morning when they found the first real clue. One of the cleaning staff mentioned that she had seen David Horn, the company's senior vice president, working late on Thursday night, the same night that Emily's desk would have been accessed. David Horn. The man who had been with Veyne Holdings since the early days. The man Alistair had trusted with millions of dollars and hundreds of decisions. The man who was now, according to preliminary investigation, the one who had been leaking information and selling it to a hedge fund competitor. It took the security team until Wednesday to piece it all together. David had been the one accessing the files. David had been the one selling the information. And when he realized that the investigation was closing in, David had planted the documents in Emily's desk, along with a carefully constructed digital trail that made it look like she was the one behind it all. The plan was brilliant in its cruelty. By framing Emily, David would slow down the investigation. Alistair would be too busy being betrayed by the person he cared about to focus on anything else. And if Emily was guilty, then David would have time to cover his tracks, to move money, to disappear. But he had underestimated one thing: Alistair's instinct. Deep down, in the part of himself that Alistair had tried to destroy years ago, he hadn't actually believed that Emily was guilty. He had wanted to believe it, because that was safer. That was easier. But he hadn't believed it. By Thursday morning, David Horn was no longer an employee of Veyne Holdings. By Friday, the authorities had been called. And by the following Monday, Alistair was standing in front of Emily's apartment building, holding a folder full of evidence that proved her innocence, terrified that he had already lost her forever. She opened the door before he even knocked. Emily had lost weight. She looked like she hadn't slept much more than he had. She was still wearing pajamas at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which was so unlike her that it broke his heart all over again. But when she saw him, she didn't slam the door. She just looked at him with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this moment and was steeling herself to hear it. "You were right," Alistair said. David planted the documents. He was the one leaking information. There's evidence. There are communications. There are financial records that prove it had nothing to do with you. Emily didn't say anything. "I was wrong," Alistair continued. "I should have trusted you. I should have believed you when you said you didn't do it. Instead, I let my fear make the decision for me." "You were my boss," Emily said quietly. "You didn't owe me trust." "Yes, I did. And I owed you more than that. I owed you faith. And I couldn't give it to you because I was too terrified of being hurt." Emily's eyes filled with tears again, but she didn't step aside to let him in. "I can't do this, Alistair," she said. "I can't work somewhere I was treated like a criminal. I can't be around someone who is going to assume the worst of me when things get difficult." "I know. Then why are you here?" Alistair took a breath. This was the moment that determined everything. This was the moment where he had to decide if he was going to be the person he had always been, the man who stayed safe by staying alone, or if he was going to risk everything for the possibility of something different. "Because you changed me," he said. "And I don't want to change back." Emily didn't close the door, but she didn't open it wider either. She stood in the threshold between her apartment and the hallway, between the life she had been living and the one she was afraid to hope for. Alistair stood on the other side, holding a folder that proved she was innocent, but more importantly, holding something far more valuable: the truth. "You don't know what you're saying," Emily said. "This is guilt talking. This is relief that you found out David was the one responsible. Give it a week and you'll go back to being exactly who you were before I walked into your office." "No," Alistair said. "I won't. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you if that's what it takes." He stepped closer, and Emily didn't move away. "Do you know what I realized while I was investigating this?" he continued. "While I was going through all those files and all those communications, I wasn't thinking about the money. I wasn't thinking about the deals we had lost or the damage to the company. I was thinking about you. I was thinking about the day you told me that my employees were people, and I didn't fire you for it. I was thinking about every moment you brought coffee to my desk and every time you quietly left notes of encouragement on the desks of people who were struggling. I was thinking about how you changed my entire world without asking permission to do it." Emily's hand trembled on the door frame. "Alistair. I spent years building an empire because I thought that having everything would protect me from being hurt again. That if I had enough money, enough power, enough control, I could create a life where nobody could touch me. where nothing could destroy me. And you know what I discovered? That I had created a life where I couldn't feel anything, either. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. He reached out and gently took her hand. Emily didn't pull away. Then you walked into my office, and you refused to apologize for being 2 minutes early. You looked at me like I was just a person, not a title or a reputation or a bank account. And slowly, without me even realizing it was happening, you began breaking down all the walls I had built. You made me remember what it felt like to care about something other than success. You made me see that my employees were people with mothers in hospitals and children at home and dreams that had nothing to do with making me rich. Emily's tears were flowing freely now. I can't go back to working for you, she whispered. I know, Alistair said. And I'm not asking you to. He pulled a piece of paper from inside his jacket. It was a formal resignation letter, dated that morning. Alistair Veyne was stepping down as CEO of Veyne Holdings. Effective immediately. Emily stared at it. What did you do? What I should have done a long time ago, he said. I gave the company to someone who actually deserves it. David's betrayal forced the board to look at the structure of the company, and they realized that I had been running it into the ground because I was so focused on control that I couldn't actually lead anymore. I recommended Marcus Chen, the CFO. He's brilliant, and he actually cares about people. He's going to make the company better than I ever could have. But Veyne Holdings is your life, Emily said. No, Alistair said. It was. But I learned something from you, Emily. I learned that the things we think define us are often just armor. And sometimes we have to take off the armor to see what's underneath. He stepped closer, and Emily finally stepped aside to let him into her apartment. The place was small and simple, nothing like his penthouse. There were books everywhere. There were plants in the windows. There was evidence of a life that had been lived, of choices made and experiences accumulated. It was the most beautiful place Alistair had ever seen, because it was a reflection of her. I spent 3 days investigating what happened to you, Alistair said. I spent 3 days assuming the worst about the person who had become the most important thing in my life. And in those 3 days, I learned something crucial about myself. I learned that beneath all the power and all the control and all the success, I was just a man who was terrified of loss. And so I sabotaged the one thing I couldn't bear to lose. I created the very thing I was afraid of. Emily looked at him, and in her eyes was all the pain of the past week, all the betrayal she had felt, all the heartbreak of being accused by someone she cared about. But there was also something else. Something that looked like hope. I don't know if I can trust you, she said. I know, Alistair replied. And I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life proving that you can. Not by grand gestures or promises I can't keep. But by showing up. By listening. By believing in you even when you don't believe in yourself. By becoming the kind of person who deserves to be trusted with your heart. Alistair, I love you, Emily. I have loved you since the moment you walked into my office and refused to apologize for being early. I have loved you every single day since. And I will love you for every day after this, whether you believe me or not, whether you give me another chance or not. But I'm hoping you will. I'm hoping you'll let me try to be better. Emily closed her eyes, and tears slid down her cheeks. If you hurt me again, I will walk away and I won't look back. I know, Alistair said. And if I ever do, I won't try to stop you. I need time, Emily said. I need to know that this is real. That you're not just running away from your old life and trying to run into me. Yes, Alistair said. Take all the time you need. But then Emily opened her eyes, and she looked at him with the same fierce intensity that had drawn him in from the very beginning. But I'm not going to take that time alone, she said. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it together. Starting now. Starting with the truth. Alistair smiled. It was the first real smile that had crossed his face in days. 6 months later, Alistair Veyne stood in front of a classroom at Columbia University, where he had just accepted a position as a guest lecturer in corporate ethics and leadership. He talked about the decisions he had made that had brought him to this place. He talked about the empire he had built and the price he had paid for it. He talked about the woman who had changed his life without asking permission. His students listened with the kind of attention that came from understanding that he wasn't just telling them a story. He was telling them the truth. When the lecture ended, Emily was waiting for him in the hallway. She had taken a new job as well, working for a non-profit organization that helped underprivileged students get access to business education. She was changing the world one person at a time, and she was the most alive that Alistair had ever seen her. "How was it?" she asked. "Terrifying," Alistair said. "Standing up there, being vulnerable in front of all those people. I didn't like it." "Good," Emily said. "Growth is supposed to be uncomfortable. That's how you know you're doing it right." They walked out of the building together, into the afternoon sun. The city bustled around them, millions of people rushing toward their own ambitions, their own dreams, their own fears. But for the first time since he was a child, Alistair Veyne wasn't thinking about the future. He wasn't thinking about what he could build or what he could achieve. He was thinking about this moment. About the woman walking beside him. About the fact that sometimes the greatest success isn't measured in dollars or power, but in the ability to open your heart to another person. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily asked. Stepping down from Veyne Holdings? Alistair considered the question. "No," he said. "Do you know why? Because I've made more money in consulting work than I ever did as CEO, and I work 3 days a week. I have time now. Time to think. Time to read. Time to spend with you. The irony is that by letting go of the thing I thought I needed to control, I actually became more successful. Not in the way the world measures success, but in the way that actually matters." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and then Emily said, "I forgive you, by the way. For not trusting me. I mean, I forgave you weeks ago, but I wanted to say it out loud." "I haven't forgiven myself," Alistair said. "I don't know if I ever will." "That's the point," Emily said, and she took his hand. "That's the whole point of being human. We make mistakes. We hurt people we love. We lie to ourselves about what we need. And then, if we're lucky, someone gives us a second chance. And we become better than we were. We become the people we were supposed to be all along." Alistair stopped walking. He turned to face her, and he really looked at her. The woman who had reorganized his entire life. The woman who had shown him that kindness wasn't weakness. The woman who had believed in the possibility of who he could become even when he didn't believe in it himself. "I want to marry you," he said. Emily laughed, a real, genuine laugh that echoed through the city streets. "Alistair, we haven't even been dating for 6 months. I know. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the kind of man you deserve. And I want to do that with you as my wife." "I need to think about it," Emily said. "Of course you do," Alistair replied. "Think about it. Take your time. But know that I'm going to spend every day proving that I'm serious." Emily kissed him, right there in the middle of the sidewalk, in front of all the rushing people and honking cars and the beautiful, chaotic city that had brought them together. And in that moment, Alistair understood something fundamental about himself and about life. You don't build an empire by staying small. You build an empire, a real one, the kind that matters, by opening yourself up to the possibility of love. By being brave enough to be vulnerable. By choosing to see people not as obstacles or assets, but as miracles. 2 years later, Veyne Holdings was still thriving under Marcus Chen's leadership, but it was thriving in a different way. The company had implemented new policies focused on employee well-being, mental health resources, flexible working schedules, A culture that valued people as much as profit. And interestingly, the company was more profitable than ever. Alistair and Emily had married in a small ceremony in the spring. Just close friends and family. No grand gestures or displays of wealth. Just two people who had learned to see each other clearly, who had chosen to build something real together. Alistair still lectured at Columbia. Emily still worked at her non-profit. And every evening, they came home to an apartment that was a blend of both their worlds, his minimalist design choices tempered by her warmth and color. On their 2-year anniversary, Alistair gave Emily a gift. It was a simple leather journal, with pages of expensive paper. Inside the front cover, he had written a note in his careful handwriting. "Dear Emily," it read. "This is a journal for you to write in. For your thoughts, your dreams, your plans. For all the things that make you who you are. I give this to you as a reminder that your life is yours to write. Not mine to control. Not anyone else's to dictate. Yours. I promise to spend every day making sure you feel free to be exactly who you want to be. Forever, Alistair." Emily read the note and cried. Not the tears of sadness or pain, but the tears of someone who had found their person. The tears of someone who understood that love wasn't about completion or possession. It was about expansion. It was about becoming more than you could have been alone. That night, they sat on their balcony overlooking the city, and Emily said something that Alistair would never forget. "Do you know what the best part of this story is?" she asked. "What?" "The best part is that neither of us is the hero," she said. "It's not a story about a man who saved a woman, or a woman who saved a man. It's a story about two people who saved each other by being brave enough to be honest. You were honest about your fear. I was honest about my boundaries. And in that honesty, we found freedom." Alistair pulled her close, and they sat together as the city lights began to twinkle in the darkness below. Millions of people out there chasing success, chasing power, chasing the things they thought would make them happy. But Alistair had learned something that most people never discover, that the greatest achievement in life isn't what you accomplish. It's who you become in the process. And becoming someone worthy of love, someone capable of love, someone brave enough to let love change them, that was the greatest victory of all. Years would pass. Alistair would eventually write a book about his journey from ruthless businessman to teacher and mentor. Emily would expand her nonprofit into a national organization, helping thousands of students access education and opportunity. They would have children who inherited their mother's kindness and their father's determination. They would travel the world. They would grow old together. But the real story, the one that mattered, was always just this: a man who learned to open his heart. A woman who refused to be invisible. And the decision they both made every single day to choose each other, to believe in each other, to inspire each other to become the very best version of themselves. That is the real empire. Not money or power or control. But love. And the courage it takes to let someone see you completely and love you anyway. This is their story. And it begins, like all true stories do, with a moment of choice. With someone brave enough to say, "I see you. And I believe in you." Not despite who you are, but because of it. In a world that will always demand more, that will always push you to achieve more and be more and have more, Emily taught Alistair the most important lesson of all: sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply to be. To be honest. To be vulnerable. To be human. And that, in the end, is more valuable than any empire ever built.